Hey everybody, Jamie here from the Flow Genome Project, just checking in after a wonderful iOS 10 experience with my fantastic iPhone. Dear God, this is a mild tech rant before we get started. If I had just bought this son of a bitch at Best Buy or somewhere else and I had had this experience with any device in my life, I would be taking it back and not only wanting a refund, but wanting some compensation for the time and suffering. I mean, this is so terrible. That I am absolutely baffled that Steve Jobs hasn't flipped the cryogenic option and come back from the dead to fix his company, who have clearly lost the plot on seamless user experience. So, all that said, that's why I wasn't getting cracking at the top of the hour, but glad to be here now with everybody. Today's topic, it's a Friday, so we figured we'll keep it interesting and lively, is going to be sex, drugs, rock and roll, plus neuroscience. So the idea here is, A, three topics that are pretty interesting to most folks, but also B, arguably some of the more readily accessible and potent, quote-unquote, techniques of ecstasy, to borrow a phrase from anthropologist Mircea Eliade. And he talked about archaic techniques of ecstasy, meaning what did indigenous peoples do way back in the day. We're talking about sort of fundamentally postmodern techniques of ecstasy, or technologies that we can use, including just mental thoughts processes and thought systems, but also actual tech, to shift our states of consciousness on demand. So, we got about 30 minutes. We're going to keep this door to door. By the way, if anybody's interested, we are inviting anybody who would like to take our free Flow profile. It's part of the largest citizen science project, kind of on the planet right now. It's got about 30 to 40,000 folks that have already gone through this, and it's like 10 questions, and it lets you know what is your unique way to get into the zone or flow state, and then it gives you both sort of tips and support as well as caveats, thing to make sure known traps. For your type of flow hacker or bliss seeker, whatever you want to call it, and ways to kind of get better at it as you go. So feel free to do that. The link should be in the comments, probably at the top of the feed. So with that said, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and neuroscience. I was just actually on a whirlwind tour of California. Got to spend some time in Los Angeles, getting to be on the Inquest podcast with Tom. If anybody views that, feel free to check that one out. It'll be about our new book, Stealing Fire. It was super fun. He's an amazing and interesting guy. And then we got to train big wave surfer Laird Hamilton and his awesome wife, pro volleyball player Gabi Reese. And so did that, and then jammed up to San Francisco, to Palo Alto, to be a part of this mind-brain neuroscience conference at Stanford University, which was super intimidating. An amazing room full of heroes and icons, everyone from David Eagleman, who's both on our advisory board, but also one of the best-known neuroscientists today, who's just, this is his first year on Stanford's faculty. Reid Hoffman, who was the founder of LinkedIn and got to tell us crazy stories about sharing a bottle of wine with Elon Musk, and how Elon's big thought, if anybody's been following Elon Musk's commentary on artificial intelligence and that kind of thing, he's a little bit skeptical, a little concerned it could get away from us, kind of Matrix or Terminator style. And so his thought that Reid shared was, what does he call it? He calls it the nano nets. So fundamentally ingesting or injecting, whatever, putting nano computers into our systems, into our bloodstream, such that they come up to our brain and basically create additional neural networks, so that we get kind of an AI turbo boost while still be human head and heart. So it's almost like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, gone silicon and high tech. So there you have it. I mean, that's what the billionaires of Silicon Valley are thinking about. And I must admit, I felt a little bit like I was in a reality distortion field. Like, oh, okay, these are the conversations that these guys are having day to day, and then the rest of us are just trying to get a paycheck and sock enough away in our 401ks. So all that said, there was a ton of crazy and interesting stuff from Nobel Prize winners, 100 patent holder wizards, and of everything from behavioral anthropology to neuropsych to neuroscience to all this kind of stuff. And it got me thinking. So it got me thinking about specifically the sex, drugs, rock and roll, the articulation of our pleasure and our hedonic seeking, or the seeking of the feeling of hedonia, right, which is just Greek for extreme happiness, and realizing why are these so popular and what's behind them. So I was listening to some music. I had rented a kick-ass Audi A4. There's this company Silvercar that's actually out of Austin, which is where I live, but they have offices in San Francisco, and it's always fun to drive a good car. They have Sirius FM. Surprise, surprise. I don't bother with that in my own car, and I always listen to the Grateful Dead station because I used to listen to those guys back in the day, and it's the only time I haven't listened to them for decades, so it's just kind of like this occasional check-in. That's what got me thinking, because those guys had 2 drummers, an amazing off-script bass player, and then 2 guitarists. And what would happen in that music, which is true for much music, so we'll start backwards, by the way. If you're interested in the sex and drugs, you're going to have to wait for a little bit longer. We're going to start with the rock and roll piece. What is the role of music in altering our states of consciousness, and why is it so powerful and entrancing and intriguing, both to listen and dance to, but also to play? And what I was thinking is, okay, hey, there's a lot of neuroscience about it. We've written in our next book, Stealing Fire, all about this. But music does several things. I mean, the first is it actually shifts our brainwave state to whatever the frequencies or rhythms are of the rhythm of the music itself. So quite often, again, out of agitated waking beta and into alpha and even other states. It shifts our neurochemical profile. So we will get shots of norepinephrine, and here's the thing about the dopamine. I want to slow this way down. Dopamine is a reward chemical, right? It's the street drug. Cocaine is one of the sort of quickest and most direct analogs for it outside our bodies, but inside our bodies, dopamine is the name of it. And it feels phenomenal. And we get a reward for dopamine when there's something called salience, which I've talked about before. And salience is not just a good thing. Salience is a relevant thing. And a relevant thing could be something that's about to eat me. A relevant thing could be something I get to eat, like red berries or an animal I get to hunt. It could also be food, sex, drugs, anything else that feels good and I like. So what happens with music, and why I think that we love the musicians we love so much, is that and also, let me just give you this, the magic of maybe, which is Robert Sapolsky's notion for when things are uncertainly rewarded, we get a 400% spike in the dopamine when it comes, versus just hit the lever, get the prize, hit the lever, get the prize, right? Hit the lever, nothing, hit the lever, nothing, hit the lever, get the prize. Ooh, jackpot, 400%. So, bands that are funky, bands that lay down a really good groove. And this is our little puppy dog going nuts. Okay. I've got 2 choices right now. I can go, this is sort of like one of those prisoner's dilemma decisions. I can go and get the puppy, which I think I'm going to have to. I bet she's going to be full of beans, and she's going to inform, at a minimum, how I deliver the rest of this live. So let me just see if we can get this done. I gave her a peanut butter Kong, like one of these little doggy chew toys, and that lasted all of 5 minutes. So now I'm going to, okay, this is live action, folks. This is like Steve Irwin has got nothing on me. I am about to go into the wild with a rabid golden retriever puppy. So here she is. And she's just been bathed, which was good for about 20 minutes of chilling out. Look at her. I think she's been checking out her whole scene. She's super smart. Super duper smart. Okay, the question will be is exactly how much damage is she going to do? Yes, you guys are still on. We just went black for a minute. There you go. Check it out. Check it out. Mwah. But she's a little Tasmanian devil. So, okay. She's a little Tasmanian devil. So I'm going to hang with her here, and we'll see how we go. Okay, so back to music, and back to musicians, and back to dopamine, and the magic of maybe. So when we have a band that is loose and funky, that is polyrhythmic, meaning they're not just laying down a singular beat, but there's interwoven things, and there's definitely different overlaps between instruments on when they come together and when they are off doing something surprising, right? That when they come back, when they hit the one, when they hit that stomping beat, right, that is when we get that 400% spike in dopamine. So not only does the music entrain our brains, the rhythms, right, our brain waves adjust, as do our mirror neurons to the guys on the stage, and our sort of emulating of what they're doing or the dancing of the people around us. But when you have polyrhythmic, funky-ass music, right, you get juiced to the gills on dopamine. And so you can sort of see this with music, you can see this with action sports, which is the sort of the adage, never lose the one, right? Never forget where the beat comes home to. Because if you're really good, in fact, if you think about the best musicians and the best athletes, they all play with that. They play with home plate. So a great drummer will be coming in behind the beat, coming in after beat, skipping the beat, stutter stepping it, and then stomping it, right? An athlete like Travis Rice, who's just coming out with his new movie this week about, arguably the world's best and certainly one of the most creative and thoughtful snowboarders on the planet. When they do things, right? Now, obviously the one, this would just be me standing upright, right? And what these athletes do is they flip and spin and twist, and it looks like it could be a total train wreck, just like a musician going off on an extended solo, and you're like, oh shit, I don't even think he remembers where the chorus is. But then somehow, right, spin, twist, flip, chord change, minor sevenths, resolve, major chord, boom! And you stomp the landing. And that experience, both for the people participating in it and for us getting to listen to it, is absolutely awesome and fulfills the magic of maybe, which is also why I cannot stand straight beat club electronica, the uds, 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 because there is no resolve and there is no magic of maybe. You know exactly where that goddamn one is. They never leave it with their drum machine. And then they even do those horrendous like fake crests where they're like, ooh, 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 and you think something's coming, and uds, 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 and it's the same goddamn thing. So this is just a public service announcement. Go out and listen to some funky, broken beat stuff. Find some good soul, find some ripping R&B, find some EDM remixes, find some West Coast bass. Do whatever you need to, people, but get off the one, because it's that much more fun when you come back to it. All right, so that's the music side. So that was the rock and roll. We went backwards. And just a little historical context, by the way, is sex, drugs, rock and roll was obviously kind of the hippie rallying cry, which was, these are the things that we're pursuing that straight 50s America did not let us, right? But it even goes back further, back into the kind of the classical wine, women, and song, right? Which you think is exactly the same thing, actually. And, okay, this may be time. Is she going to hang it in there? I think most little animals, this is almost like, what do they call it, the theory of self-test, where they give elephants a mirror to look in, or a dolphin, and if they look back at their own reflection, they're clearly switched on. Just remember, Cassie, the camera is over there. It's not where your screen is. You want to make good eye contact. We were just talking about this today. This is an interesting little sidebar. You can see the whites in her eyes. Not all dogs have whites in their eyes, and certainly most mammals don't. But part of the evolutionary adaptation of canines to humans has been the accentuation and the selection of whites in their eyes, because it's far more relatable to people. So like my dad had a black golden retriever, no, not a black golden retriever, a black lab, and that little sucker just had black button eyes and looked dumber than a bag of hammers, and he was, actually. So there was nothing to relate to. But this little one and her aunt, who's our older dog, have amazing whites in the corners of their eyes, which makes them much more human and relatable, and still no easier to hang on to. All right, so we've done rock and roll, and wine, women, and song. We've known these are the eternal techniques of ecstasy. The question is, and if you look at even like EDM these days, it's 48% of the global live music market. So clearly something is going on here with specifically music that entrains us with each other and with the beats into a trance state. Okay, now let's talk about sex and drugs. Okay, so how about, we'll go backwards. We'll do drugs first. So one of the things that's most interesting about pharmaceutical enhancement of consciousness is A, ubiquitous and has been around with us forever. B, predates human evolution entirely. So fundamentally, all right, little one, you get to go down, and I'm just going to cross my fingers that she doesn't ransack the house as we do it. So B, right, which was predates human evolution and adaptations entirely. In fact, all mammals, well, not all, but an awful lot of them, ranging from elephants to sheep to goats to giraffe to deer to dogs to birds, so include even beyond mammals, I guess, have a recurring instinct to seek intoxication. Ron Siegel at UCLA called it the fourth evolutionary drive after food, water, and sex, which you can begin to say, if we're talking about sex and intoxication as innate evolutionary drives, you can begin to see why they are such potent hedonic hacks or techniques of ecstasy, right? They're right down there at the bottom of the stack. So that you would have to think there'd be an awful lot of evolutionary reinforcing of go do more of these things, please. Music, you could argue, is just kind of one of the first emergent properties of culture, and also supports the sex part too. So, it's probably got kind of a backdoor asterisk to be in that on that short list. Oh, this is funny. Okay, so that little puppy is playing with those little door stoppers, the little spring-loaded door stoppers, and she attacks it and springs it, and then it makes the funny noise, and then she gets to play with it a little bit longer. So that said, we are into pharmacology. We have just established the idea that, hey, the notion of ingesting something outside ourselves to shift our state of consciousness is eternal in humans and predates us altogether, and B, is arguably a sort of innate evolutionary drive. This is why little kids like to roll down hills and spin around and around, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. We seek the dizziness, we seek the shift in state, as do plenty of other animals and us, and part of it is because it promotes lateral thinking. It gets us out of repetitive cognitive ruts. Now, what Oliver Sacks, for anybody that is familiar with his stuff, he's a famed neuroscientist at NYU. He just died not too long ago, but he wrote all kinds of phenomenal books. But one thing he said is that drugs offer transcendence on demand. And what he meant is that you can meditate, you can go wandering the mountains for a mystical state. In fact, the whole unfulfilled priest is kind of a trope of literature and movies, right? That the guy who's so earnestly seeking God and has never actually glimpsed it, but he goes through all the motions and he prays and he kneels and he does all this kind of stuff and he's really kind of scared and bitter at the end of it. Well, what Oliver Sacks was saying is, look, man, you can pursue a bunch of different paths to alter your state of consciousness. However, right, if you ingest a pharmaceutical, it will shift your consciousness predictably. So there's not that wondering part. Now, whether it's good for you, whether it's healthy, whether it's sustainable, a whole host of sincere and legitimate questions. But the idea that you do it and something more or less predictable will happen is a significant difference from other techniques of ecstasy. Now, what we are learning pretty rapidly is, it's a shit show when it comes to which drugs are legal and supported, which ones are illegal and persecuted, which ones are illegal and swept under the rug, which ones are legal and shouldn't be, right? So let's just, if anybody's interested, you can read David Nutt. He was the minister of, I think not exactly the right title, but fundamentally the minister of health and public harm in the UK. He stacked ranked all the substances that are commonly used on a list of 1 to 20. It's everywhere on the internet. He actually got fired for it because he published evidence-based work. And I think alcohol was number 2, second only to heroin. Tobacco was in the top 5. And of course, alcohol and tobacco are legal. You guys know the drill. So the point that we're talking about here is what's beyond an understanding of favoring some substances, vilifying others, not knowing the neuroscience, and just being wrapped up in culture and prohibition and various other kinds of underinformed moralizing. Well, the interesting thing is that any of these substances interact with our neurochemical set in more or less predictable ways. So, for instance, SSRIs, so Prozac and Zoloft, all SSRI stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Right, so they interact with our serotonin system. Well, interestingly enough, so does psilocybin mushrooms and LSD. And so you realize, oh wow, so that serotonin system is actually what's really interesting. The different chemical compounds we ingest, or the different practices, breathing, meditating, moving, running, anything along those lines, anything we do that interacts with that serotonin system is going to be, excuse me, I'm just going to do a quick dog check because I'm hearing some frightening sounds of chewing, which does not bode well. No, it doesn't. It's my Apple power cord. She's a sucker for power cords. All right. Now then, what they tell you when you have a puppy is do not scold them, but replace what you don't want them to eat with something that is okay to eat. All right. So that is going to be a Nyla bone, but I just don't think those are as interesting. I really don't. I suspect that they are actually significantly duller than the find of like a lamb's wool rug in mommy and daddy's room. All right, I am back again. Okay, I'm also going to plug in my power cord. And let me know if you guys can, if the sound has changed at all, because sometimes there's electrical interference, okay? Okay, so back to, we've got about 10? We got about 5 minutes. Okay. So the pharmacology of different substances affects our neurological systems in different ways, and the one we were just speaking of was serotonin, one of the most powerful. And you might ask yourself, well, wait a sec, it seems really strange because Prozac and Zoloft seem pretty mellow, and certainly nobody gets quote-unquote high off them. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have psilocybin and LSD, which are obviously shoot-the-moon psychedelics and plenty, capable of entirely rewiring your inner experience. So what's up with serotonin? Well, I think the short answer is that we don't really know yet. There are different serotonin receptor sites, and the different receptor sites have different reactions and inflections in our consciousness. Cool? But the big scheme of, in fact, the entire SSRI pharmaceutical industry, billions of dollars, was formulated based on one really small sample group study in the mid-'80s. And they just ran with it. And they got there. It's not a wonder drug, right? Not at all. But fundamentally, psychedelic research, which was the other serotonin site stuff, was shut down in the mid-'60s and then completely locked down in 1970. That just went away, and Prozac and Zoloft. So we got Prozac and Zoloft instead. So if you're familiar with the microdosing movement that's going on these days, where lots of people are kind of off-label and clandestinely taking very, very small amounts, sub-perceptual threshold amounts of psilocybin or LSD, or pretty much those are the two most predominant ones, they are trying to say, hey, what would it be like to put in sort of pharmaceutical or medicinal format and dosage, something else that interacts with my serotonin system? And let me see what happens if and when I do this on some kind of prescription. And James Fadiman, who's the researcher behind all this, he was the one who was doing it back when it was legal in the 60s. He's got a hell of a long career because he's still around right now. And he's running an open source project where people get to submit their reports from those kind of things. So that's all just interesting to note. Hey, intersection with the serotonin system. The same with norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is the street compound, would be sort of a methamphetamine, right, a speed, which, by the way, one molecule away from Ritalin. And again, one is supported and handed out like candy, one is vilified, but our impact on our system, norepinephrine, is perception of alertness and everything else. And then you can add endorphins, right? And endorphins would be the opioids. So you realize, okay, honestly, I was thinking about opioids the other day, and I'm like, have you ever heard anything good come from sustained use of opioids? If you think back to Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix, if you look forward to Prince, Michael Jackson, like how many famous people have died with downers, right? And it doesn't have barbiturates or opioids in their system. It's really kind of scary. Elvis, for Christ's sake. The list is longer than you can possibly imagine. So that's the good news about our internal endorphins, because the external ones are wildly problematic. But the internal ones feel great, and they're actually 100 times stronger than medical-grade morphine. So again, any substances that can trigger or prime, or activities and behaviors, right, that can trigger or prime those neurochemicals inside us give great payoff. I'm going to leave you guys with two more. One is anandamide, which is an endocannabinoid, right? So literally we have cannabinoid receptors in our brains, and fundamentally, our brain releases anandamide when this is kind of the runner's high compound. People used to think it was endorphins, not as much. It's anandamide as well. Or you can introduce it externally. So in those places where cannabis is legal and you have medical cards or recreational cards, you can literally boost your neurochemistry externally by consuming some form of cannabis. And that will shift that neurochemical in your brain. And then the final ones would be tryptamines. And tryptamines are interesting because they are some of the most potent and kind of varied neurochemicals. We produce everything from melatonin to dimethyltryptamine in small trace amounts through our brain and lungs and kidneys. And of course, these are also present. They're also these psychoactives that are present in compounds like ayahuasca. So if anybody's read National Geographic or Elle magazine or any of those places that have done kind of, here's the journalist, trusty journalist, and they go down to where they can sample these things and they come back and report. In fact, there was a new piece I thought pretty underwhelming, but a new piece in the New Yorker maybe a couple of weeks ago on exactly that. Of course, it was the kind of hipster Brooklyn. I went to this ayahuasca ceremony, downtown next to a barista cafe kind of place, and here's my witty, pithy, little takedown on it. But in any event, the neurochemicals behind that, the tryptamines, are super lively. And if you can ingest, in fact, many of the most esoteric meditative traditions, both East and West. So you're sort of like ancient Greeks and some of the Hermetic stuff into the Western magical tradition, as well as Dzogchen and Tibetan stuff. Any of the like serious juju, like only 5-10 people get taught it at a time, kind of stuff. A lot of them refer back to the notion of some form of triggering an activation or a liquid or some imagined substance generated up in the brain. Sometimes people would say the pineal gland, sometimes not, and that it would sort of drip down and activate the spinal column. And you're like, that's kind of esoteric and strange, but one of the things, and there's tons of wild-ass theories, by the way, about pineal gland, tryptamines, blah, blah, blah. We're not going to touch that stuff with a 10-foot pole, other than to say there was one mild advancement where they did find dimethyltryptamine in rats' brains in a recent, and I would say recent being the last 18 months, research project. So it went from the realm of conjecture, because Descartes, right, used to famously said the pineal gland is the seat of the soul. It's this tiny little walnut-shaped thing buried deep inside. But whether by hook or by crook, whether by ingesting from outside or by shifting our own neurophysiology in a way that stimulates more of it, if there's access to activating our internal tryptamines, then you fundamentally have the keys to the kingdom. You have serotonin and dopamine, you have anandamide, you have norepinephrine, and you have tryptamines. And fundamentally, once I can steer with those knobs and levers, once I realize there are practices I can engage in, there are foods I can consume, there are substances I can ingest, there's all these kind of different things. But remember what the point was, not me doing drugs, right? Me tuning my nervous system and my neurochemistry to gain access to specific levels of information that those neurochemical profiles provide. Ta-da! Right? You're in a very different place in relationship to your consciousness and your changing of states. And the good news about that is, it's a hell of a lot more fun. I mean, it's literally like you start painting by numbers with this roadmap, and you can have some mighty fine times. But the other point is it can limit or inhibit addictions, compulsions, distractions, and reckless behavior. Because when you don't know what you're doing, you're fishing with dynamite, right? You're just lighting shit on fire, chucking it in there, and seeing what happens. And for most people, they're like, I will do anything. I'll huff glue. I'll drive 100 miles an hour with 6 beers in my stomach, whatever it takes to get myself out of myself momentarily, just to free myself from the suffering and the heartache and the relentless, right, misery of it all. And if that's true, then dynamite, will feed you for the night, but it'll create some collateral damage. And so once you start understanding the neurochemistry behind music, behind substances, and what it's actually doing in us, and retaining agency and responsibility for that, right, unshakable, then you have a chance of being a little bit more skillful and learning to fly fish. So with that, I want to check, guys, we are out of time, and that leaves us potentially appropriately with sex to come, which would mean we've talked about rock and roll, the music and the potential elements of shifting our neurochemistry with good beats, and how the funkier things are, and the more we play with the one, or the more a skilled musician does. And when I say it, I just don't mean right? Those kind of movements enhance dopamine. Our brainwaves get shifted. Good things happen. And we don't really need the science to know that music and dancing and singing are awesome. But definite kick in the pants to go seek out some funkier stuff, because one of the other things it does is that when you have complex polyrhythms and our listening is trying to track them all, our conscious waking brain often just gets knocked out. It's just busy. You've just occupied the monkey mind. You've just given it some balls to juggle. And so when you can trust musicians to actually go on those journeys and come back to the familiar place, it's deeply satisfying, it's familiar, right? You get that amplified dopamine, and you've also had the pleasure of moments of silence without that monkey brain chattering, right? And then the substances, The substances is very much choose your own adventure, know what neurochemicals in your system they're attempting to interact with, and plan accordingly. Another great example of that is actually MDMA, right? When people, or Molly or ecstasy, right? What people will do typically at clubs and that kind of stuff is they'll bung some down, they'll have a fun couple of hours, and they'll be like, hey, I don't want the party to end. Right? So they bung some more down. And they might even bung some more down after that a few hours later. So what they've got going on is that the reason MDMA gives you a feeling of warmth, a feeling of satiety, well-being, safety, empathy, connection, all of the things that users report, is because it is unlocking a lot of these stored serotonin in our brains. But once that original flood goes through you, the ooey gooey warm feeling of yummy, it's done. So taking more of the compound, which at its base is an amphetamine, MDMA, methamphetamine, right? You've used it all up, and now you're just hitting more speed, more norepinephrine, and dopamine. So that's where I can't close my eyes, and I've just sucked holes in my cheeks. Kind of evenings happen. So like you can let friends know, right? Hey, you're chasing the tail of a dragon that's already left the building, right? So knowing the neurochemistry under these things can help you be safer. It can help you be more precise. It can help you combine experiences, foods, movement, practices, substances, but skillfully in ways that get you much more bang for your buck without as much taxing of your nervous system, your physiology, or your psychology. And generally put together, those are two of the three legs of the stool of sex, drugs, rock and roll. So that's it for today, guys. You guys have been awesome. There's a couple of questions. Binaural beats. Yes, binaural beats are interesting, somewhat controversial, somewhat overhyped in the 70s and 80s. There is a kind of a new generation of that tech that's come out. The folks at Brain.fm are the furthest we've seen in a kind of fun, user-friendly commercial app. They're doing some research at Northwestern to confirm what they've been doing. The other one was Damiana. Do I know anything about Damiana? No, I don't. Actually, so sorry about that. I've also, somebody was telling me about salvia and just the wild ass experiences they've had on it. I haven't dabbled in any of those things, so I'm somewhat clueless, but I'd love to learn more on that one. And other than that, guys, please do consider, if you want to learn more about, hey, what are my profiles? How do I get into this stuff? Check out the Flow profile. The link is in the top of the comments. And that'll show you which of four types: a hard charger, a flow goer, a deep thinker, or a crowd pleaser are you, and what are both the pitfalls and potentials of each. This was great to see you guys. Thanks so much for coming, and we'll be back. And if by popular demand you're interested in the neuroscience of the sexuality, we're happy to do that. If not, we'll kick off with another topic on another day. In the meantime, feel free to share, like, comment. All those things are great and help us get out and reach more folks. So that's it from me. I'm Jamie Wheal from the Flow Genome Project. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys next time.